here, your youth and community librarian, and welcome to another episode of Teen Read Aloud. And I am so excited, I hope you are too, because we're on our last two chapters of The Skeleton Tree by Iain Lawrence. And we want to say a huge thank you to Penguin Random House, who is the publisher of this book, for letting us read this book over the past few months on our Instagram Live. It's been so fun. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. Can't believe we're at the end. Do you think they're gonna get rescued? Oh my goodness. Okay, sorry, if you're just tuning in for the very first time, where have you been? We've been doing this for months, but that's okay. We have digital copies of this book on Libby and RB Digital, so you can grab the ebook or e-audio, depending on what you prefer, and you can catch up and then watch this episode, all right? Okay, so yeah, we're at the end. Frank and Chris have been in Alaska for months. We've been reading this for months, and we're finally going to see if they're going to get rescued. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Chapter 15, The Last Morning. Beside me in his plastic chair, Frank stretches. He yawns. Fog's burning off, he says. I see that he's right. The fog bank has dwindled to a thin mist, retreating to the south. I had hoped so hard for this to happen, but now I find I'm disappointed. Nothing was hidden within the fog. No ship is plowing toward us. I can see all the way to the horizon across an empty sea, and our rescue suddenly seems unlikely. Frank has lowered the book to his lap and is squinting over the ocean. What time is it now? He asks. Until this morning we measured our time in days. Then we started counting hours, and now the minutes seem important. I glance at the watch, Thursday's last gift to me. It's 1:10. Already afternoon. I feel a hollowness in my stomach as I calculate how long is left to go. Frank has become bored with the book. He has left Catil stranded at sea, and now he sits with his chair tilted back on two legs. His fingers meshed into a pillow behind his neck. You know, he says, I miss that stupid raven. I want to tell him, then you shouldn't have gotten angry. You should not have chased him away. But really, I was the one who did that. What if it's true, says Frank, that I could be dead if it not for the bird? So now Frank believes that Thursday saved him? I wish he'd changed his mind a lot sooner. It's weird, eh? He says. I wonder if he's hunting with wolves. Or maybe they got him. A lonely wolf was howling in the morning. It sang a long and haunting song. Frank listened as he lay on the floor with his arms covering his eyes. Wouldn't it be funny if that was Thursday? He asked. He could be doing wolf imitations. It was an idea that Frank had gotten from the book. Into my mind came a picture of the raven perched in a tree, howling like a wolf. I got up and roasted an entire salmon for breakfast. Peeled off the skin and tossed it into the fire. Frank watched me, and I knew what he was thinking. I was squandering our food. But I had to do that. To save it would mean I didn't believe. 2 more days, I said. 2 more days, answered Frank very quietly. Help will come in 2 more days, I said. It was like a little grace. After we'd said it, we ate. Into the fire went the bones, the fins, a scandalous amount of scraps. As soon as we finished, I went searching for my raven. I trekked along the sandy beach, bonkering empty bottles together as I shouted his name. When I reached the end of the beach, I took a stick and scraped Thursday into the sand with letters 6 feet tall. Then I threw the stick away and sat to watch the waves come in. I told myself that Thursday would appear before his name vanished. If he didn't, it would mean he was dead. I would stop searching. In front of me, the waves burst in their creamy rows, pushing shallow fingers across the sand. They crept a little higher each time. When they touched the tips of my letters, they rushed forward along the narrow canyons I gouged with the stick. Bit by bit, they rubbed out Thursday's name. When Frank came to join me, the letters were still there, but barely visible. Hi, he said in a cheery voice. Hi, Chris. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to look away from the letters in the sand. Frank sat beside me, and together we watched the ocean rub away and the raven's name. The waves rolled over the beach, erasing every sign of Thursday. I stood up, feeling sad and beaten. When I looked at Frank, I saw my father. He had hacked off his tangled flop of hair. His forehead was high and white, and he was smiling, an exact copy of the picture back home, of my father peering up from a lean-to. What are you looking at? He asked. Embarrassed, he started tugging at his hair. Side by side, we walked along the beach and up the trail. As we reached the forest, the rain began, and with every hour the day got colder. Soon I could see my breath, and I knew that Frank had been right. There was not a chance we would live through the winter. We were going to be rescued just in time. Already the nights were longer than the days. When the sun vanished over the sea, there were more than 12 hours of darkness ahead. We spent them talking, and Frank told me at last about Uncle Jack. I learned that our uncle had drifted in and out of both of our lives. In Kodiak, he had made 2 phone calls, one right after the other. I was really surprised when he asked me to go sailing, said Frank, putting a wood on the fire. At first I didn't want to, but he kept saying, "Oh, come on, Frankly." I laughed. Frankly? That's what he calls me sometimes, said Frank. He asked me, "Don't you want to meet your brother?" I said, "Not really, Jack." Jack. That sounded familiar. In Cubs, all the boys had called him Jack. He'd wanted me to do the same thing, to be his friend, as though he was the world's oldest 12-year-old, but it never felt right to me. I wondered what would happen if Uncle Jack's plan had worked out, if I had arrived in the middle of the afternoon instead of the dead of night. Chrissy, meet Frankly, your brother. Would we have been friends right away? I watched Frank poke at the fire, but I couldn't figure out what he was talking about. Are you sorry he asked you to go sailing? I asked. Frank leaned back as the clouds of sparks swirled from the fire. You know something? He said. I'm not. He squinted through the fire's heat. It's funny. I'm kind of glad. I felt the same way, that I was better because I'd gone sailing and for all that had happened. I lost an uncle, but found a brother, and I thought Uncle Jack would be happy with that. Frank curled up in the corner, and we slept a little off and on. At the first sign of light, we trooped outside to wait for the sun to appear. I took the pin pan and a stick, and I made all the noise I could. One more day! One more day! We shouted together. Help will come in one more day! For all 10 hours of sunlight, the wind blew hard. The waves piled up and hammered at the shore, and snow fell in flurries of stinging crystals. We danced to stay warm, around and around the watchful saint, shouting that help was on the way. We grabbed onto his scorched wooden arm as we wheeled around him. Our fingers turned black with charcoal, which was soon smudged on our faces. Like painted savages, we kept dancing around and around and around again. Frank was grinning like a fool. He believed in every way that we were spending our last moment below the skeleton tree. We drummed on buckets. We danced through the grass and over the stones, and our shadows grew steadily longer. The sky turned a lovely deep red as we whirled through the grass. Then the moon rose silvery white, and out in the forest the wolves took up our song. The last night seemed endless. Knowing we'd be saved before the next night came, we couldn't possibly sleep. So we built up the fire at the end of the point, and I read to Frank from Catil the Raven Hunter. He sat in his favorite plastic chair, his hands clasped behind his head. We reached the last chapter. We reached the last page. Catil stood face to face with the man with yellow eyes. In his hand was a battle sword made by a wizard. On his shoulder perched the leather-hooded ravens, wearing silver talons sharp as razors. With a shout, the man with yellow eyes came charging toward him. Catil raised his arm and set the ravens soaring. They flew on ebony wings, up, up, up to the sky on their ebony raven wings. The Skraeling swung his battle axe, Catil swung his sword. One was fast as lightning, but the other was even faster, and in the blink of an eye... Wait! Shouted Frank. He reached across the fire. Give me the book! Why? Just give me the book! His fingers waggled. Come on, please! I thought he wanted to be the one to read the last little part, so I passed him the book. He ripped out the last page and burned it. What are you doing? He said. The page twisted and writhed. The words bubbled up as the ink began to boil, then the paper burst into flames and was gone in an instant. What did you do that for? I asked. I don't want to know how it ends, said Frank. Why not? I asked. I never want to know, he said. I don't read endings. It's more real that way. You're crazy, I said, but I laughed. The light from the fire washed red and yellow across Frank's face. He was smiling. It's better to wonder, he said. You can decide for yourself how it ends. I saw what he meant. Catil would have won his fight and killed the man who'd killed his father, but now it was possible that he lost, and the story would never really end. But it seemed strange for Frank to think that way. I couldn't imagine that he'd read more than a dozen books in his whole life. How many could he put away unfinished? As he took his stick and poked at the ashes of the page, I wondered if it was something he'd learned from our father. Maybe Dad, impatient as always, could have never been bothered with reading a whole story. I imagined him closing it, where the wild things are, halfway done, leaving poor Max surrounded by monsters. You can decide for yourself how it ends, Dad would say, and he'd turn out the lights, leaving little Frank staring scared in his bed. I hated things that didn't end. I always wanted to know what happened to everything. I stood up. I've got to look for Thursday, I said. From the fire, I pulled a burning stick to use as a torch, but I hardly needed it. The rain had ended, and the moon was big and bright. It would be a beautiful morning on the day the men would come. I walked under the skeleton tree and down the dark tunnel through the bushes of salal, but I didn't go very far past the cabin. In the mud where the trail forked to the north and south, I found a footprint of the grizzly bear. Chapter 16. The last chapter! "What time is it now?" says Frank. He has asked the same thing every 10 minutes, but when I look at the watch, I'm surprised. 20 past 6. Sunset is less than an hour away. The wind has made me very cold, and there's not much warmth from the sun. But we can't go back to the cabin now. That would be giving up. So I put my poncho around my shoulders, and we made a fire at the feet of the wooden saint. We pull our chairs as close as we can to the flames. Frank keeps looking north, then south, then up to the sky. He reaches up to push aside the hair that he's forgotten he cut off. His face is a picture of disappointment. I'm afraid he's given up. I want to tell him to do something, to make noise, to dance around the saint and shout that we'll soon be saved. But he might tell me it's useless. He might get me doubting too. In my hands, the book crackles as I squeeze it without thinking. More flakes of paper drift away, falling like tiny leaves. Autumn has arrived for the book as well as for me and Frank. Everything is coming to a close. It's strange how stories work. I turn a page of Catil the Raven Hunter and find no others behind it. The last one is gone, torn away and burned by Frank. He's smarter than I thought. It is really nice that way. Now the story just stops, suddenly, in a way that makes no sense, and that's exactly the way our father's life had ended. I close the book and hold it in front of me, the way old men and women hold Bibles at church. Beside me, Frank is leaning back in his chair, not even looking out at the sea anymore. His eyes are closed, but there is still time for a boat to appear. "Hey, Frank," I say. He answers with a little grunt. "This is the day we'll be saved." He tips his head to look at me, just as Thursday used to. But he doesn't take up the chant. He only smiles a little smile, then turns again toward the sun. "Hey, Frank?" This time he doesn't even respond. Where were you when you learned that Dad died?" I ask. He takes a breath and sighs it out. "At home." It seems that's all he's going to say. I ask him, "Did the police come and tell you?" That's how I had found out. The doorbell rang in the evening, and 2 Mounties were standing on the porch, a man and a woman, both holding their hats in their hands, as though they had come begging for money. But Frank shakes his head. "I didn't even know for 3 days. Then I heard his name on the TV news. No charges laid, or something. I had to wake up my mom to tell her. She was so drunk she didn't understand." He kicks at a stick that's poking out from the fire. Embers explode, showering sparks. Then Jack shows up, just 1 day before the funeral, and he's all, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you get there." So he sends a taxi. But we get there late and everyone's gone, except the guys who fill the graves. "Oh, I guess I mixed the times up," he says. Yeah, right. He didn't want people meeting each other. A big scene at the cemetery. Good old Jack. I don't say anything about our cars passing. I should have guessed Uncle Jack was behind it all, arranging people's lives in a way that was meant to be helpful. As always, he tried his best to please everybody, but only made a mess of things. Across the sky in front of us, a redness glows and deepens. Frank sighs. "You still think we're going to be saved?" "I know it," I tell him. "But today's the day," I shouted at Frank, not wanting to hear his doubts. "This is the day we'll be saved." We sit quietly, staring at the sky and the sea, as though watching an enormous television. The sun touches the horizon and begins to spread across the water. There are only a few minutes left for a helicopter to arrive. They don't fly after dark. When the colors of the sunset fade to purple and black and there is still no throbbing of rotors in the sky, I decide it must be a ship that is coming to save us. There are still 3 hours to go until midnight, still lots of time for a ship to appear. I put more wood on the fire. At 10 o'clock, I know that Frank has stopped believing. I can see it in his posture. I can feel it in the air. I get up and dance around the wooden saint. I start chanting louder and louder. "This is the day. This is the day. This is the day we'll be saved." "Come on," I tell Frank. I try to pull him up from the chair, but he won't move. I whirl away from him and reel across the rocks, twirling past the fire. The flames bend toward me, reaching out as though to stroke my legs. "This is the day. This is the day. This is the day we'll be saved." The minutes go by. The hands of my watch swing toward 11. In a little more than an hour, the day will be finished. It's our last chance. "Frank, please," I tell him. With 55 minutes to go, he gets up. He joins in the chant. He circles the saint, keeping pace to stay on the opposite side of my circle. Like a pair of moons going around a planet, we sing and dance, my brother and I. "This is the day we'll be saved." Wave after wave bursts on the rocks below. The hands on my watch keep moving. The second hand ticks from number to number, and the minute hand crawls towards 12. To everything around us, midnight means nothing. The waves will keep rolling toward the shore. The stars will keep shining. There will be nothing to mark the hour except one more tick of the watch. For all I know, it's five minutes fast, or 5 minutes slow. But according to the watch, it's midnight now. I look out over the sea, certain I'll see a ship appear, or a searchlight turning, or an airplane's dazzling beams suddenly switching on. But nobody comes to save us. Today is not, after all, the day we'll be rescued. Our dreams were only dreams. We let another hour pass, sitting together beside the fire. Nearly a full day has gone by since I woke Frank by shaking his shoulder and shouting his name. In some ways, it's been the worst day of all, and I see now that we're in terrible trouble. Winter has nearly arrived. Frank wanted enough fish to last until spring, but we don't even have one for breakfast. We have no matches. If our banked fire dies one night, so will we. I feel like crying as I get up and go back to the cabin. Frank seems angry, but that's his way. He slams his shoulder against the Saint as he passes by. It topples slowly, then crashes onto the rocks and goes tumbling down into the sea. Then Frank turns back and kicks the fire into huge flurries of sparks, scattering the last pieces of wood. Some fly like meteors through the darkness and plunge hissing into the black water. For a moment, I think this will be our saving, that a passing ship will see the sudden flash of fire. I watch for it, the sizzling trail of signal flare, but the sparks just fade away and everything is black and empty. We don't have a torch to light our way, but as we pass under the skeleton tree, our eyes adjust to the dark and we see the northern lights. They're blue and shimmery, spreading like a thin veil over nearly half the sky. They soar above us as we make our way to the cabin. At the door I ask Frank, "You want the bed?" "No, go ahead." He sort of laughs. "I doubt I'll sleep much anyway." He banks up the fire in the circle of stones to keep it safe through the night. Then I settle down on the foam mattress with my poncho for a blanket. We hear the eerie sound of wolves in the forest. They're closer than ever. Frightened and sad and lonely, I fell asleep thinking of my father. But it's Uncle Drac I dream about. I see him again at Puff's big steering wheel, and he still can't hear me. For once I wake early to a terrible crash as the boat plows into something in the water. Frank screams. Something clamps around my ankle and drags me from the bed. I grab onto the table, but it falls over with a clatter as everything on top of it tumbles to the floor. "The bear!" shrieks Frank. Its teeth are digging into my ankle. It grunts in the darkness as it drags me across the cabin. I pull the table with me through the circle of stones, through the pile of ashes. Embers come alive, growing red in the darkness. Then flames appear, leaping pale and yellow like little spirits. Their little glows on their face of the grizzly bear gleaming in its eyes. Its great hump quivers as it pulls me through the door. I grab the chair. I grab the bed. But I can't hold on. I can't save myself. "Help!" I shout. There's Frank. I see him now. He's pressed into the corner, drawn up so tightly that he looks like a child. I cry for help. "Help me, Frank!" But he seems paralyzed. Then I'm out of the cabin, sliding down the dark tunnel of Salal. The bear is hauling me into the forest. It moves faster. The bright flickering of the northern lights falls through the trees as though blue fire burns in the forest. Wolves begin howling and their voices rise to a barking clamor. The bear drags me around the turn in the trail. I snatch at branches, at bushes, and they all tear away in my hands. I roll over and back again, every move sending pain shooting up my leg. I'm afraid the bear will snap my foot off. A black shadow flashes across the shifting shapes. Others appear behind it. The wolves are running. They're bounding along the beach, splashing through the surf. Amid their frantic howling is another sound, the raucous cries of a raven. The bear pulls me down toward the canyon of Salal, into the ancient forest. There is no glint of starlight, no gleam of blue aurora below the towering trees. There in the darkness, the bear lets go of my ankle. I try to squirm away, but it plants its massive paw on my chest, pinning me to the ground. I feel myself sinking into the moss as its nose comes snuffling up along my leg. There is the smell of fur, of awful breath, of fetid wounds and blood. In the darkness, I can't see Thursday swooping down, but I hear the whistle of his wings, the piercing cackle of his voice. He flashes past the grizzly's head and weaves among the trees. The bear raises its head and bellows, and suddenly the wolves come crashing out of the Salal. With snarls and grunts, they leap at the bear. I squirm away on my back, slithering helter-skelter over the moss. I roll onto my knees and scurry away like an animal, dragging myself through the forest as the animals roar and scream behind me. They snarl, they growl, they gnash their teeth. Thursday dives again and again, screaming as he plunges through the darkness. His cries drive the wolves to a frenzy. Among the trees around me, a flame appears, and there is Frank, running down the trail with two bright torches. He is calling my name. "Chris!" I call back to him, and a moment later he's bending over me. The light of the torches flares through the Salal, and I see the bear in the darkness, turning to run. I see a wolf clinging to its back, another biting its heels, and I see my raven, poor Thursday, lying on the ground. I crawl toward him and pick him up. His neck seems to have no bones, and his head flops over onto my fingers. His eyes are open, but they're gray and glassy. His heart makes a tiny flutter that I can hardly feel it. "Oh, Thursday," I say. Frank plants a torch into the earth and makes me lie down. He eases me back onto the green moss and moves the other torch above me, looking for wounds and bites. I want to hold on to Thursday. He has given his life for me, and I wish I knew the magic of the forest so that I could give it back to him. His eyes slowly close, and the warmth begins to leave his body. Frank runs his finger down my ankle. "It's not too bad," he says, but there's a throbbing pain in my foot, and I can't tell from his voice what Frank really thinks. He helps me up, then leans forward so I can use his shoulder as a crutch. He pulls the torch up from the moss and leads me away with the light. I hold Thursday even tighter. His wings feel brittle and dry, like old dead plants. I start trembling. "I'll build up the fire," says Frank. "You'll be warm in a minute." But I don't want to go back to the cabin. Frank helps me all the way to the skeleton tree and beyond it to the rocky point. There we wait for dawn. I cradle Thursday in my hands. It's early morning when I carry him to the skeleton tree. Frank has offered to help, but I want to do this by myself. Even though the bear's teeth have left 4 punctures in my ankle, and my foot feels as though it's on fire. With Thursday in the crook of my arm, I climb the heap of plastic that Frank gathered for a beacon. I work my way into the branches of the tree, climbing among the skeletons. I'm not sure the branches will hold me. I'm afraid of them breaking, afraid of falling to the ground, with the bones rattling down on top of me. I can't put weight on my foot without crying out in pain. The raven feels empty, a hollow bundle of feathers, along with the light in his eyes. He has lost whatever it was that made him a creature, a little character that could feel love and jealousy. I want to reward him in the only way I can, by placing his body in the highest box in the little coffin where he can lie nearest to the sky, in the sun and the wind that he loves so much. I step up from branch to branch, wincing when my wounded ankle takes all of my weight. I climb past the coffins, and for the first time I look down and see the skeleton stretched out inside them. The bones are all separated, but still in order. One more step, and I'm near the top. I peer into the little coffin and see the skull of a child looking back at me. Behind it, the shadow cornered of the wooden backs. Things have been tucked away. I think at first there must be offerings to the child, maybe favorite toys or pretty shells, but I can't make sense of their shapes. With Thursday in my arm, I have only one free hand to reach inside. I stare into the coffin, surprised by the things I discover. There's the little whistle that Thursday had found so appealing. Here's the flare Frank and I could never find. Here's a coin and a key that must have belonged to the cabin guy. And here's the body of the other raven, the marks of the wire still pressed into its body. So this is where Thursday nested. Maybe the two of them together, warm and dry under the little roof of the coffin lid, they watched over the bones. I imagine Thursday had stashed the watch here as well. He hadn't plucked it from the dead man's hand to give it to me. He'd chosen it just for me from all the little things he'd stolen from the cabin guy. I can see that man now, shouting with rage as his belongings disappeared one by one. I feel foolish and sad, so much for the mysterious shifting bones and the scratchings from the coffins. All along, it had been Thursday. This is where he'd come every night, to be the caretaker of the dead, and the watchman of the skeletons. As I slide his body into place where it belongs, I see one more thing in the box. I have to stretch to reach it. When I see what I found, my hand begins to shake. Still sealed in a Ziploc bag is a battery for the radio. Will it work? That seems almost too much hope to hope for, but I remember Frank with a child's purse, his hope for a cell phone. Those batteries can last forever if they're charged. Is this my last gift from Thursday? I place him gently in the coffin. I return all his things, keeping only the battery and the flare, and arrange the skull as I'd found it. I climb down the tree. In the deep shadows of the other coffins, I see twigs and moss and bits of bark all stowed away by Thursday, but I don't reach in among the bones. I'm guarding the battery in my fist as though it's made out of crystal. Frank is in the cabin. He's crouching on the floor, rearranging the stones in the fire circle. I reach over his shoulder and dangle the battery in front of his face. He leans back to see it more clearly, then his hands shoot out to snatch it from me. "Where did you get this?" he asks. But already he's getting to his feet. He grabs the radio from the shelf and fits the battery into place. His hands shake and the pieces rattle, but he gets it all closed up. Then he turns it over in his hand, reaches for the dial, and suddenly he's just staring at me with a stunned expression. The knob is gone. Of course it is. We'd forgotten that. It flew off when Frank hurled the radio down in his first fit of temper. I'm afraid he's going to do it again. He looks so frustrated. "Give it to me," I say. My fingers are smaller than his. I'm sure I can turn the little stub that remains. Then I remember Thursday playing with little bits of glass, bringing me the dial from under the bed. Where did I put it? I scan the cabin. The window! The dial's still stuck in the boards where I jammed it in place a month ago. I pull it away and jam it onto the stub. I switch the radio on. There's a click. There's a hum. Lights flash, glowing red and orange. I press the transmit button. Mayday, I say. Mayday, mayday. Nothing happens. Mayday, 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 I shout. No sound from the radio. It's ruined, I think. Frank broke more than just the knob when he threw the thing. I glare at him. Let go of the button, he says. You can't talk and listen at the same time. I remember Uncle Jack telling me that. You can either transmit or receive, but you can't do both. I take my thumb from the button. Right away, a woman's voice leaps over the speaker. Coast Guard Radio, Anchorage, over. I grin at Frank. He grins at me. And it's just like our first day in the cabin. I press the button and babble into the radio. We were on a sailboat, and it sank, and now we're in a cabin, but I don't know where we are. We need help. My name's Chris, and I'm here with my brother. The end. Wow! Oh my goodness, what an amazing ending. How scary was that with the bear? And Thursday, oh my gosh, poor Thursday, but they found the battery and it looks like they're gonna get rescued. Wow, what did you guys think of this story? I had so much fun reading this to you guys, and I hope that you have enjoyed it as well. And don't worry, if you enjoyed reading this along with me and listening to me read this, don't worry, there's a new series coming very soon. Stay tuned. Starting in July, we're going to be starting a new book, and there's a bit of a contest and a prize involved. So make sure you stay tuned to our Instagram account at MHPL Teens to get all the details and information of that new book and contest. All right. Thanks so much for joining, friends. I hope you had fun. Until next time, stay safe. Bye.